Welcome back to my channel, where normally I analyze aspects of The Last of Us Part 2, the video game. This video will be a little different from my other videos, and it might be a bit more controversial, but it contains thoughts I've been stewing on for a couple months now that I felt I needed to express in order to carry on making my usual Last of Us content. The truth is, I've been feeling pretty angry ever since Season 2 of The Last of Us on HBO aired. Not at the show itself, but at The Last of Us fan community who reacted with such egregious antipathy when the show didn't meet their personal expectations. The Last of Us Part 2 is my favorite story of all time, and I was so excited to see it adapted for TV. But unfortunately, for me, the whole experience was ruined when I realized I was witnessing a violent cycle repeat itself. What was supposed to be an exciting, fun time, as fun as it can be when we're talking about The Last of Us 2, quickly became an online war zone, the likes of which was hauntingly familiar as someone who was a day one fan of this game. It's no secret that the sequel to the hugely popular video game The Last of Us remains one of the most controversial games of this generation, and perhaps ever. Despite its critical success in being the second most awarded game of all time, Part 2 was extremely divisive amongst fans of the franchise. Some lauded it as a flawless masterpiece, others declared it to be the worst game of all time, and some never even picked up the controller before confidently branding the entire game as dog shit. For those of you who don't know, Part 2's release window was marred with leaks that spoiled major plot points out of context and sparked an aggressive hate campaign the likes of which I personally have never seen. Until now. From the hate and death threats that the creators, actors, and even their families received, to the harassment I personally faced as a creator who spoke about the game positively online, the whirlwind of negativity exposed major issues within the gaming community and fandom culture in general, from entitlement and reactionary outrage to misogyny and racism. Misogyny in particular ran rampant as gamers watched their beloved Joel beaten to death by a woman whom they didn't find physically attractive. This hatred permeated the game and targeted the women who brought Abby to life, from the writer who created her, to the actor who portrayed her, and even to the woman whose only sin was being the character's face model.
There's some stupid stuff that's like, you're a feminazi, you're whatever shit like that, but it's like some stuff was really like, you know, disturbing.
The hatred, I think that was behind it. I was sad. Like, there were a lot of days where I would just cry.
Every time I went online, it was just, that's all I saw was death threats and threats of violence. And the worst of it, the really like hardcore death threats got passed along, and they, made sure that they weren't anyone that like lived close by. Yeah, they were like threatening my son, who was born during all of it, and yeah, it was rough. It was rough.
All of this is why, as Season 2's premiere drew nearer and more information got revealed about the show, I got a bad feeling in my gut when I began to recognize a pattern repeating itself. Once again, female and female-presenting actors were on the receiving end of misogynistic hate. This has sadly pursued the casting of Bella Ramsey as Ellie since Season 1, and carried over to the other female lead, Caitlin Dever, when she was cast as Abby, simply because her body didn't look the way fans wanted it to look. Once again, Abby's body was the only thing people seemed to care about, with some going so far as to say that Abby is nothing without her muscles. Once again, I found myself on the receiving end of aggressive backlash simply for pointing out that these sorts of responses, though perhaps well-intentioned, were perpetuating the very problem people were purporting to be criticizing. While there is something to be said about the representation of diverse female body types in media, and in the game Abby's physique is definitely one of the things that makes her stand out, fighting perceived misogyny with actual misogyny isn't the way to go about having those conversations. It's especially apparent when you take into consideration that none of the castings of male characters received nearly as much scrutiny, despite the actors not resembling their game counterparts either. Unfortunately, this trend continued as the season went on. The portrayal of Ellie became a hot topic, with some complaining the character had been dumbed down, and others expressing disdain about the fact that this 19-year-old character didn't go on a violent murder spree against an armed militia thousands strong like she did in the game. Once again, folks fought fire with fire, claiming that the creator's handling of Ellie was misogynistic while simultaneously reducing her to a stupid lesbian kid in their own critiques, and completely ignoring the journey Ellie does go through in Season 2, as well as the layered and complex performance Bella Ramsey rightfully earned an Emmy nomination for. Some of these arguments genuinely baffled me and made me wonder if we all played the same game, because if you take away the long stretches of gameplay like the show did in both Seasons 1 and 2 for what I had thought were obvious reasons, what remains is the story of a traumatized, grieving young woman in a strange, violent city who is completely out of her depth. To me, this was consistent in HBO's portrayal of Ellie, and also gave the character lots more room to express a variety of emotions over the course of her journey, something that is far more essential for the main character of an episodic drama series than the player character across several hours of gameplay. I also found it incredibly ironic that the same people making jokes that Caitlin Dever wouldn't believably be able to murder Pedro Pascal with a golf club were suddenly outraged that Ellie wasn't going around killing every grown man she came across at every opportunity. People claimed the handling of this confrontation was rooted in misogyny while ignoring the heartbreaking conclusion to this scene, which saw two young women on opposite sides of a conflict desperately trying to save an unborn baby as its mother took her last breaths. In yet another example, people were so eager to brand the handling of this iconic Dina and Ellie moment as misogyny while dismissing what Dina was actually expressing in this scene. To me, it was clear she wasn't actually talking about Jesse, but was rather trying to give a voice to her own feelings about herself. It's her sadness she's addressing, her disappointment, her uncertainty about her identity. And isn't it ironic that another common critique I've seen of Season 2 is that it lacked nuance and subtext, and yet all the nuance and subtext in scenes like this one seem to go completely over people's heads. While there are valid critiques out there, and by no means am I claiming that the season was perfect, this behavior, amongst other things, has led me to believe that a majority of these criticisms people levied against the show were not actually about the show at all. They were simply expressing disappointment that the show wasn't a replica of the game or what they personally expected it to be. So many of the reviews and comments I have come across are so focused on what the show isn't or didn't do, instead of talking about what the show is and did. As Season 2 continued and the hatred increased, I also started noticing arguments from 2020 being repurposed to criticize the show. It's bad writing, Ellie isn't Ellie, everything feels forced, the pace is bad, ignoring the actual emotional journey the characters go on because people were too busy focusing on their looks or their likability. With each episode that was released, people would freak out about certain changes they made and the impact this could have on story beats later on, seemingly forgetting the fact that in the game, you really don't know exactly what's going on until the very end, blaming everything they didn't like about the show on the creative lead, harassing him on social media, and moralizing anyone who didn't agree with their assessments as a bad person or a sellout. As someone who was around when the game was released and witnessed the initial shitstorm, it was like watching the same thing unfold all over again. And I can tell you that on the receiving end of it, the hatred felt exactly the same, regardless of where it was coming from.
We're no better than he was.
It's been incredibly disappointing to witness a story that is so much about different perspectives, empathy, and having patience while the story fully unfolds, attract people who claim to love the source material and yet fail to learn from its message or apply it in their real lives. And then people are surprised when the creative leads of both projects decide to step away.
It was a traumatic experience for myself and many people on the team, and the kind of hate we got because of those leaks will stay with me forever.
Thank you so much for listening if you made it this far. Obviously, everyone is entitled to their own opinions, and if the season really wasn't for you, that's okay. But if this video offended you, I invite you to take a moment to reflect on your own behavior throughout the season's release and investigate why something I said may have struck a nerve.